Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, literature, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the program. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria. Tracy, what's new with you?
Not too much, Bruce. Just getting ready for the Halloween season and getting some Halloween movies and spooky movies into my evening routine. So I'm really impressed with that. How's everything going with you?
Good. Halloween is fast approaching. A great holiday, great time of year, both in your home of Canada and my home here in America. Normally, we start the show with banter about what's going on in the popular culture, latest horror movies, TV shows. We're not going to do that this week, though, because we've got a lot to get to with our guests today. They are the show, and our guests are Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley. They are the creators and caretakers of the Stokerverse through books, role-playing games, other products, travel excursions. The Stokerverse carries on the legacy of the great Bram Stoker. He, of course, wrote the iconic novel Dracula. Dacre and Chris are both authors as well as generally creative minds. They devote much of their time to promoting the name of Bram Stoker, what he did in bringing us one of the most famous monsters in history. Dacre and Chris, welcome to the Ghostly Gallery. We thank both of you for joining us. How are you?
Well, thank you, Bruce and Tracy, for having us. I just heard you guys say, you're getting ready for Halloween season. No mystery, you guys, that for Chris and I, it's season long. All year long is Halloween season if we play our cards right. But this is sort of like the World Series of Halloween season. October is just awesome. I mean, I love that when the colors change, it gets cooler, fireplaces go. But as Tracy said, the spooky vibe, nothing better.
Hey, folks. Well, yeah, and I have to tell you, tomorrow in Alberta, snow is forecasted.
Oh,
so
my
this
goodness.
this is the start of it. So we have had the lovely, as Dave was talking about, the lovely changing of the seasons and the autumn leaves. But in Alberta, winter comes very quickly. Now, that adds to the spooky atmosphere a little bit with the snow and the obscured vision. But yeah.
Very good. Yeah, it is a great time of year, even though it does get a little bit colder and the snow may be a little bit early for us here in October, but perhaps not for you north of the border. So Dacre, let's begin with you. I'm curious, when did you first learn that you were actually related to Bram Stoker, who was your great-granduncle? Was this something your family told you about when you were very young, or did they keep that knowledge away from you for a while?
They were merciful. They allowed me to take a fair amount of ribbing from classmates and people who'd come around. I was brought up and raised in Montreal, Canada, and Halloween, like everywhere else, was trick-or-treating, and the night before was all those pranks you pulled and everything else. And so people would come to our doors and like, "Oh, the Stokers, what are you going to do to us? Give us candy or take our blood?" Ha ha ha. I finally, probably at the age of 12, asked my dad, "What the heck is going on? What are they talking about?" Because I was well aware who my great-grandfather was, Bram's youngest brother, George, but I really didn't get the significance. And so, I was 12 or 13, somewhere there, Dad brought me down to the family library downstairs and pulled out this book, and it was a first edition of Dracula. And it was really a special edition that I am now the caretaker of. It is the edition that went from Bram to his mother. So he signed to my dearest mother just a day before the novel actually came out. And then she passed it on to her son, Richard, who moved to Victoria, British Columbia. He passed on to his wife, and then it went all the way across the country to Montreal to my dad, and now I have it. I did not actually read that because I was smart enough to realize this is an heirloom. Don't turn those darn pages and chance, spilling something on it. But I picked up a cheap copy somewhere, and over those years, multiple readings. It's a tough book to get through. It took me a while to get through it. It probably really wasn't until college that it really hit me, Bruce, that the impact of this novel, there was when I started going into the library, because I did a project for it in English literature at St. Lawrence University, that this was widespread, and that these two Boston College professors did a big expose in search of Dracula. And so I realized it's more than just, well, this is a book written by a family member. This really is a wide-ranging arc of how it's translated around the world, how it's transformed the horror genre, how many different screenwriters, playwriters. So that was the stage, probably about 18 or 19, that I realized really the significance of what it's like to be a relative of somebody who wrote a book that changed the world.
Well, that's interesting. So until your father sat down with you when you were 12, you perhaps knew that you shared the same name as the author of Dracula, but no idea that there was that real family connection.
No, none at all. And look, I watched the Addams Family, the Munsters, Dark Shadows. It wasn't like we were all drawn to horror. It was just something that, you did. So there was not really any changings in our life because of that. And I think part of that is, the humble Canadian in us. And many people who are relatives of famous people, don't go around banging on your chest saying, hey, I'm better than the rest of you, or look at me, I'm a relative of so-and-so. I mean, I got the feeling from my dad, and he was a stockbroker, and he worked hard. He was an equestrian. He rode in the Canadian equestrian team. He worked his way up to all this. He got everything that he earned. And it was like, you got to make a name for yourself, young man. The Stoker name's not going to get you anything. And nowadays, even with my writing, the Stoker name gets the foot in the door, but it also brings higher expectations from publishers, editors, and anybody that Chris and I are trying to bring work to. It's like, yeah, we'll listen to you. But we also know that all those people who are going to do reviews, either on Amazon or on Goodreads or anywhere else, they're going to love to nail you if you look like you're just trying to ride the coattails of your famous relative. And that is something that has stuck with me as a teacher, as an athlete, and a coach. Is look, the stopwatch is going to, there's no lying there. There's no getting around it. And the same thing with the writing. We do our research. Chris and I go to the nth degree to get things right. We line ourselves up with good co-authors and good co-producers of games and so on, because we're not out to sort of make a fast buck on the family name. We're out to really expand the range of products with new products that weren't available in Bram's day to a new audience, and help people better understand who Bram was. And my tagline is, my mission in life is to help people understand that the creator is just as interesting and maybe more interesting than the creation.
Well, you've done a phenomenal job in really carrying on and promoting the legacy of this great man, Bram Stoker, penned what I think is the most iconic horror novel that's ever been created. It's obviously, you take it very serious. You're very passionate about it. Now, the work that you do with the Stokerverse, promoting the legacy of your great-granduncle, is that your full-time job, or do you have to balance that against some other kind of work as well?
Yes. So it almost becomes a full-time job because it requires a lot of work, and I always seem to be on. I was a school teacher for 25 years and an athletics coach. I also ran a land conservancy. So now I simply coach one guy in a strange game called court tennis. Happens to be the world champion, and I do that, probably 6 or 8 hours a week. I run a foundation called Aiken Streetscapes that manages large trees, grand trees in my town, help pruning, help undergrounding power lines, and so on. But the creative side is now taken over, 90% of my efforts, and it's either on the phone with Chris or on Skype or FaceTime or something with Chris as we're chatting about stuff, or digging deep into archives and finding new and different things to bring into the Stokerverse. So yeah, it's become full time, and I do enjoy it. I go on the road a lot. I'm home for all of about 4 days this month. This is one of them. I lead tours to Transylvania. I go and give lectures. Actually, this coming week, I'll be in Greenville, South Carolina, doing dramatic readings with the Greenville Symphony Orchestra as they play Philip Glass's rendition of Dracula. So it's all kinds of different ways to deliver the message, to spread the word, and to entertain people. And it's really enjoyable for me. It's a lot like teaching and coaching. It's just, different materials to use to get people fired up.
Oh, that is absolutely fascinating. I am so interested in hearing about your tour a little bit later on in the hour. That was the one thing that has totally piqued my interest when I was doing some research, was that Transylvania tour. But I have a question for you, Chris. I was curious how you first became interested in the life and the work of Bram Stoker.
Well, it started at primary school. The novel Dracula, and it was a complete unabridged novel. It wasn't a young adult novel. It was in our school library, and I read it, and I had to do a book report on it. And I found it, a fascinating book. I'd been very lucky as a child because my mother always encouraged me to read the classics, and I grabbed the book, read it, and was captivated by it. And then I started to research more about Bram Stoker, looking more at his works, Lair of the White Worm, and some of his poetry. Now, I went to the same university that Bram Stoker went to, Trinity in Dublin. And I used to drink under this sort of picture that had all these various Irish writers, and Bram was there. And I remember looking at that and thinking to myself, I need to find out a little bit more about Bram Stoker, because he was a little bit of a closed book. Dacre wasn't active in those days, and it was very hard to sort of get any information about Bram Stoker or any of his other works except Dracula. And then, as I started a professional relationship with Dacre, I get more and more interested in who Bram was as an Irishman, what he did beyond Dracula, his other pieces of work, his fantasy fiction, his drama, his work as an illustrator, all of that kind of stuff. I became fascinated with the fact that Bram Stoker was this Renaissance man. He had, whenever Dacre and I were writing The Virgin's Embrace, we looked at various things like the fact that he had assisted Buffalo Bill in bringing his stage show over to London, and his work at the Lyceum Theatre. The Virgin's Embrace is set in Nuremberg. And Nuremberg's very important because that's where Bram and his wife Florence went on their honeymoon, and it's also a place where Vlad II received the Order of Dracula as well. So there's lots of things that I find now fascinating because Dacre and I have looked at them, and it's given me a broader understanding of Bram's life.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's amazing. I didn't know he was also an illustrator. So this is going to be a really good learning experience for me too, as we go through our conversation today. So thank you.
Dacre, I'm sure over the years you have heard and read a lot of things about Bram Stoker that you know to be false, from your family histories, the research that you have done, what you've heard from your relatives. What is the biggest myth or misconception about Bram Stoker that's out there?
Ooh, the biggest misconception. There's a lot of, let's just say, medium size, and I'll touch on some of them, Bruce. But the problem is, just as Chris said, there's not much source material by Bram, about Bram. No autobiography. He was so busy. First, when he was a student at Trinity, he was an all-around athlete. Tracy, that's where he actually started, a founding member of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club. So his artistic side came there. He also was writing theatrical reviews. He loved the theater, but he also had a job as a clerk in the Petty Sessions legal department, and then traveled all over Ireland as the inspector of all the clerks in the Petty Sessions legal department. So I think what happened was this was a very dutiful man to get the job done. When I found his lost journal, when I was digging for it during my research, my first book, I kind of made me aware that Bram was somebody who was very aware of the world around him, but he was willing to do something about the injustices that he saw, as was his mother. And so what bothers me a little bit is when people write biographies about him or these quick little articles around this time of the year, they will kind of put together little thoughts, circumstantial evidence without backup. And one of them is, oh, he must have been bisexual because he wrote letters to Walt Whitman. And what bothers me is you've got to take all these things in context. And there's nothing obviously wrong nowadays. It's no big deal, right? We get it. Back in those days, it was a big deal if you were bisexual. And he was friends with the Wilde family. He was very close with Willie Wilde, Oscar's older brother. They were classmates together. Oscar Wilde, as we know, got put in jail for homosexuality, but he was also had been dating the young lady that Bram ended up marrying. Bram remained friends with him. And Lady Jane Wilde, Oscar and Willie's mother, was a literary mentor to Bram. But nonetheless, you see that relationship. Oh, well, he wrote letters to Walt Whitman and described his physique. But Bram was also heavily into phrenology, which was one of these early sort of fringe sciences that was sort of saying you could tell about someone's character by looking at their features. And he knew that Whitman had leanings towards phrenology. So I hate when people jump to conclusions because they get one little piece and they realize, oh, this is going to sell a book. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, be complete in your research. Whatever you're doing, do it thoroughly. Bram had a childhood illness, 7 years. I could be one that says, well, here's my theory. And I think it was probably respiratory allergies and asthma because he was debilitated for 7 years. And then I found a doctor who specialized in Victorian forensic medicine. He said, well, Dacre, your theory could be right. They didn't have any medicine for asthma and allergies. The type of bedding that they slept on was either hay or straw wrapped in linen. Where did he live? Oh, he lived in Clontarf, Dublin Harbor, very misty and mildewy. Ah, well, there's molds and mildews that would be right by his face when he's sleeping. And was there any other of that in the family? Yes, there was 2 other brothers that had it. Ah, when did he get out? When did he grow out of it? Oh, about the age of 7. But he didn't totally grow out of it, but he started walking for exercise. And he ended up becoming a champion race walker at Trinity College in the athletic department. He won the all-around athletic championship. So whatever was ailing him was not something to sensationalize, meningitis or, black plague or something. It was probably something not as exciting, but respiratory allergies, and people grow out of it. And there still is a lot of it in our family. My son grew out of it at about the age of 14, and he became a champion rower in boarding school and college. So all these things are possible, but that's the whole thing, Bruce, is when you got a guy like that who has written a very dark, macabre book that has some social references to it, female sexuality, and maybe Dracula was homosexual because he said, this man belongs to me. Oh, that's the hint that Bram Stoker really was repressed in his sexuality. Come on. That it's a little snippet. It's interesting. It helps sell books. Mm-hmm. But let's try to put it in perspective and try to get a picture, the big picture. And that's the type of thing that I try to do is be that guy that looks at all the biographies, debunks some of the things, and potentially then solidifies certain circumstantial evidence. Say, yeah, there is some backup for that. Yeah. So that's kind of one of the missions I'm on as well.
You mentioned his correspondence with Walt Whitman. Wasn't it also pretty common for writers of the 19th century to correspond with each other, to write letters to each other? That seems to me that was pretty common.
It was common. And I'll tell you what, probably the main theme that I've gathered between these two is Leaves of Grass that had some of these homosexual overtones. Whitman could get away with that in America because the press was much freer. In England and Ireland, not so much. And Bram, who wrote a paper about censorship, and sometimes look, it's good for the community to have some censorship. he tried to convince Whitman. He said, if you cut out some of those poems, you'd probably sell a hell of a lot more books. Whitman was like, absolutely not. If I don't, that's not me. And so these guys had this sort of connection. Like, I'm trying to, Bram sold a couple of books and stories early on. I think he could sell a lot more. He debated on behalf of Whitman. And so you're right. This is where they made this connection. And Bram luckily got to meet him twice. And the lawyer who became the good friend of Bram's, Thomas Donaldson, Bram paid homage to him by naming him as the captain of the ship that brought Count Dracula back to Galatz in the end of the story. And Bram delivered his Dracula typescript to Donaldson as a thank you, because Whitman left Bram in his will all of his notes on Abraham Lincoln, because both of them thought very highly of Lincoln and his freedom, his emancipation. So this is where they connected, Bruce.
Interesting. Yeah. Chris, how about you? Is this part of what motivates you to get the story right? Yeah, you want to learn more about Stoker from your own perspective, but as you dig deeper, as you do research, is this part of what pushes you forward? You want to let people know, here's the truth, here's what we really know, and then maybe here's what is speculation.
Well, I'm very passionate about Irish literature. Like Ireland itself was always known as the land of saints and scholars. It was the Irish that, after the fall of the Library of Alexandria, protected a lot of our understanding of math and science. And with Bram being an Irish writer of great note, I mean, let's be honest, he had written I think it was 12 novels in his lifetime. There's a lot. He had written a lot of stuff that people don't know about. And like Dacre and I, when we started the Stokerverse, we very clearly wanted to start with something that was non-Dracula, because we wanted to bring out other aspects of Bram's work. And that's why when we wrote The Virgin's Embrace, which is originally entitled The Squaw, when we wrote that and we put the original version in there, and then we had the graphic novel adaptation, it was very important for us that we present Bram's other works. As the Stokerverse has continued, we've brought in characters from Lair of the White Worm. We've brought in characters from Bram's days as a manager of the Lyceum Theatre. We reveal who Dracula, we believe Dracula was based on through an issue 2 of Dracula Return. All of this kind of stuff we're bringing and lacing the Stokerverse with. It's fictionalized, but there's a lot of Bram in there, a lot of factual context in there as well. So we're hoping that the Stokerverse is a gateway to start to bring people into Bram's world, and it gives us a platform on podcasts like this to talk about his other works and aspects of his life. So this is what I'm quite passionate about. The other aspect is I'm a Freemason. I'm publicly out as a Freemason, and Bram Stoker was a Freemason as well. And actually, I think so were his brothers. So that's very important to me as a Freemason to, we Masons always try and look after a brother Freemason's family and a brother Freemason's reputation. So that's another motivation that I have.
Interesting.
Hey, Bruce,
when we had Chris on the first time, he had mentioned, oh, sure, go right ahead, Dacre.
Can I just say that an important thing happened today that's typical of what Chris and I are dealing with. A story was discovered by an Irishman, Brian Cleary, in Dublin, who, due to very slow digitization of newspapers around the world, and this happened in the National Library of Ireland, that Brian was couldn't work because he had a hearing problem just developed, like one of these things that's just boom. And so he had to sit down and figure out for a month or so how to get work with hearing loss. He was actually a guy working with infants in the Rotunda Hospital in Dublin, so he needed a stethoscope. So he was really had to figure out how to do this. He discovered a story that was published by Bram in 1890, short story, just before he started working on Dracula. And this is just hit New York Times, Irish Times, London papers. I'm sure you can find links to it, called Gibbet Hill. And it's really kind of spooky and creepy crawly. But Chris and I have been finding not quite this gold, but things you stumble upon like this, because he published stories in magazines and newspapers, in addition to having them published in proper hardcover books. Those are easy to keep track of. But when things hit newspapers, and newspapers then go under, the edition is lost in a box somewhere. And I know how expensive it is for these archives to hire people to just digitize and stick them on the scanner and have all the words just right, so that they can get picked up by search engines. This is a really important date because of this Gibbet Hill story, and the fact that it gives us an insight into Bram's thinking of sort of this story has to do with sort of a nightmare or dreamscape type thing, much like Jonathan Harker does in Dracula, that it looks like he sort of expanded later on. So my message is there may be more things out there that Chris and Dacre find, other people find, but when we do, it's like, okay, thank goodness the Rotunda Foundation is publishing this book electronically and also paperback. But I think when Chris gets a chance to read this, we might be doing that as another graphic novel too, like we did with Virgin's Embrace, because it's pretty eerie and creepy.
Very interesting. We had Chris on several months ago. It was during the winter months, and he had talked about how he doesn't necessarily go out and do that many public appearances, even though he's a writer and author. But in contrast, you're always on the road. You're always going to conventions, book signings, the trips to Transylvania, fan events all over the place. Recently, for example, there was an evening at the Cameron Stanford House. I'm interested in some of the encounters that you've had with fans, in particular of Dracula, which of course is Bram's seminal work. Talk a little bit about some of the interactions with fans that have been unusual or especially intriguing to you.
I will, and I just feel it's my responsibility, because a good duo like Dacre and Chris, someone's got to put the nose to the grindstone and do the work. Someone's got to get out and meet people and press the flesh. But it's people do like to talk, and they like to put a face to the name. And I've had so many people come to me with different stories, but they look very serious. I'm at my desk. I'm signing some of the Stokerverse books, signing some of my own books, and it's like, your great-granduncle's book has changed my life. I read it once a year, and I still haven't figured it out. Or, oh my God, I've seen all 15 movies, or all 20 movies. Let me tell you what it's all about. Have you read the book? No, I haven't read the book, but this movie. So you get everything, right? There are over 600 movies with the Dracula in it, or citation in it. There are probably 200 or 300 with a real movie about Dracula. And then there's so many different books that have adapted the idea and sort of a spin-off and so on. So I get it that this, in one form or another, literature, stage, screen, comics, social lifestyles, adult beverages, whatever it is, people want to connect with it in one way or another. And so I've been in situations, somewhat humorous, in places like New Orleans or Los Angeles, where you can expect, some of the dark side to come out. And I was actually politely, I may say, asked if I would donate a little Stoker blood. And first, as naive as I was, I thought, oh, have we got a bloodmobile around? Am I supposed to go down here? And it was, no. They wanted a little Stoker blood. And I thought, and it didn't shock me, Tracy, too much, because I'm aware of that subculture, that people voluntarily like to exchange blood, one donor, donee, and the properties of somebody else's blood kind of energizes folks and so on. And that's okay. I'm not judgmental, as Ted Lasso says. I'm curious, so it's like, yeah, interesting. but I just wasn't quite prepared to get solicited myself. So instead I said, well, how about a business card and one of my books instead? So I had a good comeback. But I think the other one, though, is this book, to the people that take it seriously and don't just watch a movie, because it's so complex. I've had it described to me by somebody, oh, Dacre, it's like an onion. Every layer you peel back, you get a little bit of extra. And the more you peel back, the more you love it. And what do you think about this theory? And so, I get a lot of theories headed my way. And it's like, that could be. You may be right. No, I don't know everything. I think I have a pretty good idea now of Bram's writing process from his 125 pages of notes. I've been able to look at the typescript and seeing everything taken out. I've seen his journal. It wasn't written while he was writing it. But I've also seen a recent discovery in the London Library, the 26 books that he listed in his notes for his references. And I've been able to read all these books. So I know what he was reading because he actually cheekily, with a pencil, made some markings in the margins of those books. But what we don't know, things like Chris McAuley was brought up with, which is that incredibly dense amount of Irish superstition and folklore that just permeates that culture in a very similar way that I now know about in Transylvania, who have very similar superstitions and folklore. And actually, a book by Lady Jane Wilde drew the comparison between the two, and that book was in Bram's personal library.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. Those stories
So
are...
I think she directed him to look into Transylvania, Tracy.
Oh, really? Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of like shocked about the whole blood proposition. That's... I still can't get over that. I just can't even imagine. I'm sorry. That would be a really huge kind of double take if somebody were to ask. That's wow.
And people wonder why I don't go to conventions, hearing stories like that. Yeah.
Wow. I think that is probably a very unique request. Absolutely. So, Dacre, I actually have one of your books here. And
oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I'm actually just starting to read it, and it is pretty cool. I'm really enjoying it. So I was just curious to ask you, the horror genre has evolved a lot since Bram's time. And a lot of what we see today really started with the character of Dracula. So what do you think Bram would think about the horror genre as it is today? Do you think it's something he would like and approve of? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it obviously is full speculation, but when I look at his life as a theater manager, 27 years with Henry Irving, they revolutionized the way the Lyceum Theater worked. And as a result, Henry Irving was the first actor ever knighted for his contribution to theater, and Bram Stoker received a lot of credit for that in newspaper articles and in obituaries and so on. So when I draw that comparison to every good theater manager loves a long run, and they are very used to adapting and modifying plays that they would put on to sort of be of interest to the audience, but also play to the strengths of the actors that they had at their availability, at the money they had for set designs and so on. So if I was to say to Uncle Bram, what do you think of a 127-year run of Dracula and all the spin-offs that other people have done, he probably would say, bloody right. Good on you, good for you. Because that's, I think, something he would have valued very highly and would have been very proud of. He was a humble man, so he wouldn't have beat his chest and jump around the room. Probably would have had a nice glass of claret, which he enjoyed. But I think that's how he would look at it, as an homage to something that he really spent a lot of time on. None of his books took him more than a year to write. This one was 7 years. Mind you, he was very busy, but he did an extraordinary amount of research and put a lot of heart and soul into it. And I think as a result, he'd look back and go, yeah, good on me.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Chris, I want to pick up on something Dacre talked about a moment ago. He mentioned there have been over 600 adaptations of Dracula in films alone. And that doesn't include necessarily TV shows or documentaries, books, that sort of thing. We've seen, just in the last year or so, we've seen The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which didn't do well in the theater summer of 2023, largely because there were two other blockbuster films out at the same time. I thought it was a very good movie, though. It was centered on one chapter in Dracula. Just coming out this year is the new Salem's Lot. And Salem's Lot really is an Americanized version of Dracula. I'm curious, Chris, are there any upcoming projects that you're excited to see or to read in relation to Dracula and vampire lore? Is there anything coming out that you're really focused on taking a look at?
Here's a terrible confession. I don't watch horror films. I don't watch horror films. I read horror, but I don't watch horror films. Now, Dacre and I do have something that's coming to film festivals next year, which is an adaptation of Sheridan Le Fanu's Carmilla. And that is something that I'm particularly excited about because, Carmilla was written, I think was it 26 years before Dracula, Dacre? It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
26 years before Dracula. Wonderful story. And we've got an Irish film crew who are adapting that at the minute. And that'll be hitting film festivals next year with the Stokerverse brand on it. So, yeah, Salem's Lot, actually, to be honest, I would like to see the new one. I've never seen the older one that came out, so I might give that a little watch to see what it's like. I did enjoy Voyage of the Demeter. I did enjoy that. I thought it brought out the more bestial side of Dracula. I'm not somebody who enjoys the effete romantic style of vampirism. I believe that they just come and rip your throat out. I think they're as cold as the winter night. They're all inherently evil creatures. That was what we were brought up with, in Irish folklore about vampires and creatures that came from the bog. They're all inherently evil. They're all coming to steal your soul, your blood, or take both, maybe. So I love those kind of adapts. Well, yeah, I've seen 30 Days of Night as well. 30 Days of Night actually influences me in some of the writing I do. But my stuff is not necessarily gothic horror. It's fast, brutal, bloody, violent, and it leaves an impression at the end of it.
I've got to put a plug in for Nosferatu.
Well, that's an honest answer, and it's a good answer too. Yeah.
Oh, the Nosferatu in
The new one.
December. Oh,
That'll be coming out, I believe, in
I'm
December, and that has received.
I'm looking forward to that. There's lots of history in the family, obviously, of the original being the knockoff version. No hard feelings. I'm glad it survived. And Florence ended up doing just fine with the sale of the stage rights and so on. But to see William Dafoe again, Robert Eggers, this is the type of film, even though Chris doesn't enjoy watching this stuff, but he's going to watch it. I know he will, because it's like everyone's going to ask us. So we need to have an opinion, just like the Last Voyage of the Demeter, which I love too, Bruce, by the way. I'm actually going to be seeing it for the third time when I go to Romania on this trip.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, I understand that you have a trip. It's coming up very soon, right? October 27th. Is that correct?
Yeah, I head over there. We've got 9 people on the tour. We're actually got a private party at Brand Castle to launch Stoker Wines, which is another venture I'm involved in. And then we're going to go to all the right places: Tracy, Siggy Schwara, Hanundwara Castle, the right places that where Vlad the Impaler did his thing, as well as Count Dracula. And we're going to be going to the Brasov Festival. It's the Dracula Film Festival in Brasov, where I'll be doing a presentation, and that's where I'm watching. Again, I'll be introducing and watching for the third time The Last Voyage. So it's a fun time of the year to be in Transylvania. They around their #1 tourist attraction is Bran Castle. They have huge parties going on, bringing lots of different celebrities. And I'm excited because this is a new venture I'm involved in. We're actually launching a real Romanian vineyard that me and some investors have purchased and rebranding it as Stoker Wine. So a little business and pleasure all together, Bruce.
Yeah. So that's October 27th to November 4th, your Transylvania tour. You do these pretty much on an annual basis, and it sounds like just a blast. For those of us, and that includes probably most of our listeners, we have never been to Transylvania, to Romania, to experience the land of Dracula firsthand. If you could give us a little bit of a synopsis, what it's like, what kind of images does it stir in your mind of what your great-granduncle wrote about? If you could give us a little bit of a summary, what would it be?
Well, I don't want to disappoint you. You're not going to arrive at the airport and immediately see people walking around in black capes with a high collar. It's really a very happening place, very modern city, Bucharest. But it's an interesting country because you've got a lot of German influence, you've got a Hungarian influence, and of course Roman influence. And what I really like is the historic places. A lot of these old castles, and this is where the vibe rises to the surface. The castles are well preserved, and many of them are being renovated. Pornari Fortress, where Vlad the Impaler fought battles from, was under renovation. Different palaces, old, interesting old 400 or 500-year-old things. So you get a feel when you go into these castles that we are stepping back to the time of both Vlad Dracula and Count Dracula, especially when you go to the very castle, Bran Castle, that Bram Stoker looked at when he was describing his fictional castle, Dracula. So you get that feeling. In the countrysides, these old fortified churches, these massive walls around towns. These are countries that survived during the 1500s when Vlad was ruling from the Ottoman Empire that was coming into Christian Europe. So you see these fortifications, cities, Bruce, that people live in that are 700-800 years old with still the walls around them, and they're cobblestone streets. So you kind of go back and forth between very modern 5-star hotels, very fancy food, and then going into the countryside, and it gets a little darker, and the cows are all coming home from the pastures, and the guy's blowing the horn, and we're having coffee or tea with one of the villagers, and getting the stories, and we do sit around fireplaces, and we do tell horror stories. We do read parts of Dracula. We do have locals come in and tell us about real superstitions. So we create the environment we're looking for. It's just not always out there as this is Dracula land. You can make it what you want, but it's a safe place to go. Very friendly. They still love North Americans, and the price is right. It's not as expensive as Central Europe to go for trips.
Mm. For those who might be interested in doing one of these future tours, and you generally do at least one a year, when people go, are you kind of the leader, the tour guide, or do you let other people that live in that area take center stage? How does that work?
No, I'm glad you asked. So I've had a couple of different companies that I work with. I host it. So I am the color commentator, put it that way. But the nuts and bolts are done by a company called Experience-Transylvania. Gloria and Nora, they're two sisters. One is moved out of Transylvania, lives in Stockholm, where her and her husband manage the company. Nora still lives in the country. So we have two locals, and they manage what hotels we stay in, where we eat lunch. I'm there with the sort of the side of the history side of Bram Stoker. Hey, we're in this place. I'm going to read you this excerpt because this is where Bram got Jonathan Harker arriving. I've got the actual maps that Bram used in his research in the London Library. We're going to look at that at lunch, and we're going to say, this is where we're going. We're following this route today. We're going to go to this national park and hike up to the actual location of Bram's fictional castle. And so I'll explain all that. So it's really a good combo. I mean, I have been there 14 times, but I don't speak the language, although a lot of English is spoken. But it's also, it's nice to have real locals to do all the bidding for me. and I do all the fun stuff.
Yeah, it just sounds like a great time. What an experience that must be. We've got about 20 minutes or so left with our two guests, Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley. And over this final segment, I'd like to talk to both of you about some of the things that are going to be coming out as part of the Stokerverse. And I want to begin with Chris. Chris, you had sent me a note that you have a 40th anniversary book on the Terminator coming out. Tell us more about that.
Oh yeah, this was a lot of fun. So I've been working with the Terminator franchise for the last 3 years in video games and RPGs and short stories and stuff like that. And Studio Canal had asked me to provide a few short stories for a 40th anniversary Terminator book that's coming out. So yeah, I really enjoy science fiction and the world of the Terminator. Which kind of blends a little bit of horror in there as well. So yeah, that's a fun project to be part of.
And when is that going to be coming out?
That'll be next year. So that should be on the shelves early next year.
Oh, nice. So I have a question. You had mentioned about a card game from, is it Iconic Studios that is in production for a world release?
Yes, but there's Dacre's got it there. He's holding it up. So it is Stokerverse card game. It's Iconic Studios, and we have got prototypes. So that's actually a prototype. But it's going into mass worldwide production in the next few weeks. I'll be able to give details on who will be stocking this across UK, Europe, US, and Asia. There's some of the Stokerverse's characters there, Countess Knowledge and Regrets that Dacre's holding up. Also, she's also in our Dracula Return comic book. I'm first seen in Bram Stoker's Dracula's Guest short story. So yeah, that was a fun project to work on.
Oh my gosh, those cards are absolutely beautiful. I know like our podcast listeners won't be able to see that, but we will make sure to share some of those pictures on Bruce's Facebook, the Ghostly Gallery Facebook page. But we're also going to probably air this video on YouTube, so our YouTube listeners will be able to actually see those, because my gosh, they're gorgeous.
Chris,
yeah, it was an artist.
Sam Santos?
Sam Santos, I was about to say that. Yeah, Sam Santos. And he's also done the cover for our next tabletop game called Dr. Frankendice, Monster Mayhem. And it's a slightly lighter side of the Stokerverse. It's a family-friendly game where you play as one of 4 inventors. And your castle is about ready to get stormed by villagers with pitchforks, muskets, and flaming brands. And you've got to build your monster quickly to go and capture some of these villagers and put them in your dungeon. So it's a great game where you can build your own monster through various cards and dice, and then you go and you capture villagers. And it's kind of it's really quick fire game. You've got to build your monster as fast as possible, and it's so it's a lot of fun. Sam Santos did the cover of it. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful piece of cover art, and it's nice to be able to take. I mean, one of the reasons that I've kind of come up with this with the game company was because there's times that I'm on the phone with Dacre, and he's got his lovely grandkids there. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice if like Dacre could play a Stokerverse game that wouldn't scare the bejesus out of the kids, so he can sit and he can play this little dice game. And yeah, I write kids books as well. I've got a Halloween kids book coming out on at the end of the month, and yeah, I love the idea of getting kids actually playing board games, not just video games, but board games as well. I think that competitive play is great in a family environment.
Oh, wow. No, that is so cool. Video games are great, but there's nothing like sitting down and playing a board game, Sunday evening with the family and just kind of, being together. And I mean, especially that artwork is just gorgeous, but something to start family traditions with, right? Play those board games and get some fun and some history in at the same time. Let me see here. Chris, you had spoken earlier about a film that was coming out that you guys are working on. Did you want to talk a little bit more about that as well?
Yeah, it's coming from a company called XG3 Productions. It's comprised of several award-winning producers and directors. They asked me to come on board as well, which was very kind of them. So I am a co-owner of it. And we were looking at maybe doing a Stokerverse film of some kind, a short film. And, Dacre and I had bounced together. We bounced some ideas off each other. And we've always liked the character of Carmilla. In the Stokerverse, she's seen as Dracula's niece. This film's slightly different because there's Dacre's holding up the cover of issue 2 of Carmilla, wiping blood off her fangs there.
That's beautiful.
It's a lovely cover. So, we sat and we thought, well, how do we take the novel and create a short film from that and make it quite compelling, true to the original novel, but just change it slightly, give it a little bit of Stokerverse originality. So we wrote the script together. And we have an Irish crew who's going to be filming it. It's going to be filmed in a place called Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland because there's a lovely, creepy, spooky forest there. And so we're going to be doing that. That will be out next year, and we'll be hitting various horror film festivals next year. So I'm quite excited about that one. And we've got some wonderful.
Chris, let me tell that. There is a legitimate connection between Joseph Charles-Leffanu's Carmilla and Bram Stoker's writing. When I discovered those notes, Bruce, in the Rosenbach Museum, Bram originally planning to set Dracula in Styria, the province of Austria, where Carmilla was set. And that was literally all over the first few pages of his notes. And my thinking, again, circumstantial, was, fellow Irishman's already convinced everybody with this wonderful book that the vampires are real and that they're there. I'm just going to carry that on. Yeah. So thanks to Lefanu, Bram got that going. That's why Chris and I feel it's a logical connection. As it turns out, Bram goes to Whitby in Yorkshire, and he finds Transylvania and Dracula, and he changes it. But that was the original thought process. The original motivation was following in the footsteps of Lefanu and Carmilla. That's why it was an easy decision for Chris and I to sort of put this Carmilla in the Stokerverse where it originally was.
Oh my goodness! So the film festivals that
you just mentioned,
we will. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bruce. Oh, I was just
go right
curious.
ahead. I'll get to my point in a moment.
The film festivals that you will be attending when the film comes out, will you be taking that to Canada as well as the United States?
Yes, it'll go. The film will go worldwide.
Okay.
So yeah, it's hitting horror festivals near you, hopefully, next year.
Oh, very nice. Oh, that's exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that. You mentioned, Dacre, the Rosenbach Museum, which has these wonderful research notes from Bram Stoker. That brings to mind our friend Edward Pettit, who has been on our program several times. We had him on recently. And I want to say it was Edward who had mentioned to me how good the Carmilla novel is. I've never read it, but it is really a wonderful piece of literature. I imagine you're very familiar with it. And that's something I want to get to this winter, because I've heard that is one of the better 19th century horror novels, and it's one that it just doesn't get the publicity it deserves.
No, it's funny. It came out before Dracula, but Le Fanu had many other wonderful works. But maybe it's just because Dracula is so dominant. But I highly recommend put that in your list. And then the other thing for you and your listeners, put Dracula's Guest on your list. The short story that was once part of Dracula typescript, and that's where Chris and I also drew things from. And I've got proof that was once part of the typescript. Wonderful short story to get you into the season.
I may not
Guest and Carmilla.
I may not watch horror, but I do read it. And Dracula's Guest is an incredible story. It's very eerie. It's very powerful because of that. It leaves a lasting impression.
Well, let me plug this, Tracy, because once you finish Dracula the Undead, and I know you're going to want to read Dracula. Dracula is the prequel to Dracula. But J.D. Barker and I did our research, and this is when I discovered that Dracula's Guest was the original beginning of Dracula. So our prequel, Dracula, ends in the exact location where Dracula Guest occurs, because that was the original beginning of Dracula. So if you're going to do a prequel, you better line the cards up just right.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
Couple of the other things you've got coming out, and one is coming out within the next week. Chris, you're excited about the Stokerverse beers, which are being released in Canada. And I guess they have a brand name of Let Me In. I got to hear more about this.
Yeah, I'm always excited about beer. So, this is no brainer. Dacre and I do this every year, that we team up with a brewery and have a little limited edition beer to see, just to celebrate the Halloween season. And this particular beer, it's coming from a brewery called Trial and Ale. It's an award-winning artisan brewery, and they specialize in sour beers, which was a new concept to me, I have to admit. But they pair excellently with various cheeses and foods. So it's no surprise that, along with this artisan brewery, they are connected to several gourmet restaurants. So one of them is called Lower, and that restaurant is a pizzeria. And again, they've won lots of culinary awards for their pizza. So I teamed up with the guys at the brewery. Dacre and I chatted about the possibility, and we wanted to create something that was that reminded us of Dracula. There had to be something in the brewing process that linked to Dracula, and the guys came up with it, that this is actually an ageless beer. This beer will not go flat. It will not die due to the various microbes they've injected into the beer.
Immortal.
It is an immortal beer. That's actually what they said to me yesterday. Thank you. Yes, they said that to me yesterday. So it's an immortal beer. If you drink it, you won't become immortal, and if you drink it, you certainly won't die. It's a very tart cranberry based beer. I had a couple of glasses of it yesterday, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to do this at Halloween. So it's going to be available in the brewery and connected to their various culinary enterprises for the Halloween period. So from Friday until next Thursday.
Oh, that sounds so fun.
Very good. Now there's one other item that is kind of the big one that I would like both of you to talk about it, and we'll begin with Chris. It's called The Shadows of the Stokerverse. What exactly is that?
Well, this is an interesting one because the RPG book that Dacre's holding up now, this is the quick start. If you have a look at the cover of that, That's done by Clint Langley. So this goes into the whole thing of whenever I look at vampires, I see them as that. I see them as vicious, very powerful creatures. I mean, this is one of Dacre's favorite images by Clint Langley of Dracula holding the child. Now, this was actually a scene Dacre and I talked about a couple of years ago when we started the Stokerverse, and it's extremely horrific. I mean, you know, the three ladies, the weird sisters, as Hollywood calls them, the brides. They're coming after Jonathan Harker, and Dracula says, "No, you can't have him yet." Well, what are we going to eat? And then Dracula hands him a little innocent baby, and I can just imagine Harker listening to the child's limbs being ripped apart, and you know, all the various innards of the child being eaten, and the child just being ripped apart, as I say, like a piece of KFC chicken. And whenever I went into I was chatting to Clint about this for the artistic vision of the RPG, I said it was very much a gothic Hellraiser style world. That he performed that task amazingly in the RPG. So our publisher at Scratch Comics, Shane Chipsey, came to me and said, "I'd like to do a Stokerverse illustrated novel / art book, and I think Clint would be interested in doing more Stokerverse." So we had a chat with Clint. He was very excited about it. So the process began where Dacre and I started looking at various stories and little things in the Stokerverse. It's not completely Dracula-centric. You know, the Stokerverse is a lot wider than Dracula. We've got a reimagined version of Frankenstein's creature. We've got a reimagined version of Jekyll and Hyde. We've got a reimagined version of Sherlock Holmes in there. We do have Bram Stoker in there as well. We've got Aleister Crowley. So Bram Stoker being a Freemason, connections to the occult, possible connections to the Golden Dawn. He may have met Crowley. And we have stories in the book about that are all painted. So that Clint doesn't do digital art. They're all painted. They're all hand painted and then scanned. So he's one of the sort of the last traditional artists. Now, Clint is well known for his Marvel DC 2000 AD and Warhammer artwork. He is a master artist. I can't keep track of all the awards he's won, but to be teamed up with him to do this style of a book, which is fully illustrated, there's illustrations on every page. It really breathes more life into the Stokerverse and extends the Stokerverse out, which we've been doing with the comics as well. So it's been a fun project. It's coming to Kickstarter this week. You can wishlist it now and get notified. And there's going to be all sorts of extras in our Kickstarter campaign. You really don't want to miss this one. If you're a fan of Dracula, horror, Stokerverse, this is going to be a wonderful project to hold in your hands.
And it's not the romantic Dracula. Just want to warn you now. It is macabre. It is Clint Langley at his best. You know, it's really dark, dreary kind of stuff. So if you want to get in the mood this time of the year, sit down with your hot toddy, a glass of wine by the fireplace. This will do it. It's really been interesting to expand, Bruce, as we've been doing stories, games, dice games, RPG, but we've never done an art book. But as Shane said, hey guys, let's do an art book with stories. So we provide the stories.
Right.
Clint does the art, and the readers just will get, I think they'll be, bring you back to the original Dracula that Uncle Bram intended.
But Dacre, you'll have input on this too?
I hate to say it, with my name on it, I have been putting everything. Even if I'm not necessarily writing all the stories, every story that Chris writes in the Stokerverse, we're chatting about it. He may send it to me. I may suggest some changes. So yeah, I'm like the guy behind the curtain. If it's a Stokerverse product, it's got to pass its way through me. I may have a big imprint. I may have a small imprint. But choosing Clint Langley is like so easy. Just do it. Just do it, Clint. I don't have to. I don't like that.
Yeah.
Would you change that? No.
Well, so many projects coming out as far as the Stokerverse. Certainly, it's an exciting time for both Dacre and Chris, and for those fans of Bram Stoker. And there are still many, so many years later. You mentioned earlier, Dacre, that you guys have a website that's a good place for fans to go to. Tell us what that site is and what people will find there.
Sure. This Stokerverse.com is a recent build that Chris and I were in charge of, and it shows some of our own books that we've done, and then the ones we've collaborated on together. I've got one another. If you're more academic and want to get more into understanding Bram, that would be BramStokerEstate.com. A lot of research that my wife and I do, other people do, and want to put it on our site, as well as buying books and things as well there. And then DacreStoker.com has info about the lectures as well as the tours.
All right, so the primary website, Stokerverse.com, but there's also BramStokerEstate.com and then DacreStoker.com. Dacre, by the way, spelled D-A-C-R-E. I love the name, by the way. I should have asked you this right at the top. The name Dacre, I'm very jealous of that name. I absolutely love it. I imagine it's Irish in background?
It is. Here's the short version. So Bram's father had a brother who had a child named, about to be christened, Henry Hugh Gordon Stoker. And the man who he chose to be the godfather was named Dacre. And he said, put the name Dacre in there and I'll leave him my fortune. And this man was headed to South Africa to get into diamond mining. And he didn't have a big fortune, but HHG got the name Dacre, who became a very famous submariner in the British Navy on loan to the Australian Navy, commander of the first submarine that went up the Dardanelles during the landing and the Battle of Gallipoli. So interesting, decorated war hero, First and Second World War, went also on the stage. My parents met him on their honeymoon. They just thought he was the coolest guy. And he said, keep the name Dacre alive if you have a son. And they did. He wrote me letters. I never met him because I was born in 58. He died in 62. But I have these trove of letters and all his scrapbooks from his life. So I carry that name proudly. Sometimes it's a bit of a burden because people have a very hard time pronouncing it when they first see it. But once they get it, like you, it's a cool conversation piece. So thank you for bringing that up, Bruce.
Yeah, very nice. We really appreciate our two guests who have joined us over this past hour, Dacre Stoker and Chris McAuley. They are the creators and caretakers of the Stokerverse. Again, their website is Stokerverse.com. Dacre, Chris, thank you very much for your time and your insights over this past hour. We really appreciate it. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to Chris and Dacre, and of course to my co-host and faithful producer, Tracy Asteria. We thank all of you for joining us as listeners as well. We thank you for being part of this Museum of the Macabre, and we hope you'll join us next time right here in the Ghostly Gallery.